Well, welcome to our discussion of Old Testament eschatology. We're going to just take a very quick fly through the Old Testament and look at some of the different ways people have suggested that we read eschatological literature in the Old Testament. And so this is Eschatology in the Old Testament, part of the Bryan College Online series. And what we're going to talk about is eschatology of the Old Testament, just a kind of 30,000 foot flyover looking at all of it. We'll look at this question of Ezekiel's temple and how that fits in. We'll look at Daniel and his 5 kingdoms, take a kind of deep dive there. And we'll look at the 490 years and the different ways people have interpreted that. So when it comes to eschatology in the Old Testament, there are wide opinions about that. And even within the relative conservative group of evangelical Christians, there's a wide difference as to how to look at it. One way we'll see this prophecy of the 490 years, that the last 7 of those years have been postponed, and often evangelicals who side with this view will see the 7 years of the tribulation connected and interpret it that way. Some evangelicals are more persuaded by the idea called partial preterism, which means that at least some of the predictions in both the Old Testament and the New Testament were about the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and therefore some of those things might not be as applicable to us now. The basic question is there a triumphal expectation or is there a negative expectation? And so we're going to look at these ideas and these questions together. Ezekiel in 572, about 15 years after the temple was destroyed, has a vision in Ezekiel 42, and this is from Logos Bible Software. And that section in Ezekiel just measures like each one of these courts. It has Ezekiel walk around to various places and look at things. It ends with this river of life coming out of the temple. And biblical interpreters haven't really known what to do with that. When Ezekiel is having this vision, there was no temple that existed, and yet Ezekiel is measuring it. And so is this a future temple? Is it the heavenly temple? And interpreters have debated this, and there isn't really a settled conclusion of it. But what we know is that this vision is huge. If you think of an American football field, that's the size of it. Let me see if I can get my cursor to come here. It doesn't seem, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that this temple is huge, very huge temple. Also related to Old Testament eschatology is the vision that Nebuchadnezzar has and that Daniel interprets of this giant statue that somehow represents 5 kingdoms. Traditionally, this is going to be connected with the head of gold of Babylon, the Medo-Persian silver, the Greece empire of Alexander the Great, and then the Roman Empire, at the end of which this 5th kingdom comes about, a stone cut without human hands that becomes great and fills the whole earth. And so the question is, well, what exactly is that? We have the passage in Daniel 2 where Daniel talks about this is what you've seen, and it represents kingdoms. You are the head of gold, that's your kingdom. And then there's this stone that strikes it and fills the whole earth. So the question becomes, what is that? And the New Testament would answer, well, it's connected with Jesus and the coming kingdom of God. Of the increase of your kingdom, there will be no end. And so when we get to this Old Testament eschatology, we're doing what we've done in all these classes. We've stepped back and looked and said, okay, how are the New Testament writers interpreting this? Coupled with that is the prophecy in Daniel of the 490 years. We have this prayer in Daniel 9, a very exemplary prayer where Daniel reads something in Jeremiah, and as a result, he begins to pray and to ask God. And so what Daniel had read was this prophecy in Jeremiah 25, 11 through 13, and it talks about how the destruction of Israel will be 70 years. The exile will be 70 years. And so Daniel went into exile around 605, and when he's having this vision, it's about 539. So he realized, hey, these 70 years are about over. And so he begins with this prayer of stunning confession of sin and humility. And if you ever want to see, an exemplary prayer that gets answered, read the humility of this. Confesses his own sins, his people's sin, that God is just, and basically Daniel is saying we all got exactly what we deserve for rebelling against you. But then he begins to pray about the sanctuary, and he begins to ask, well, what about your holy temple that's been torn down? And so he prays and he says, incline, oh my God, incline your ear, open your eyes, and see our desolations in the city which is called by your name, for we are not presenting our supplication before you on account of any merits of our own, but on account of your great compassion. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, listen, take action. For your own sake, oh my God, do not delay, because your city and your people are called by your name. And then the text says, while he was speaking, God sends the angel Gabriel with an answer. Now, what's interesting in the Bible is that Gabriel appears two places in Daniel 8 and in Daniel 9. About the time of the evening sacrifice. In the New Testament, Gabriel appears two places. In fact, these four places are the only places that Gabriel appears. And so the first is connected with the birth of John the Baptist, and then a second is connected with the birth of Jesus. And so the New Testament writers are clearly connecting this fifth empire, this kingdom of God, somehow with Jesus. The difficulty becomes when we as English readers try to interpret what these 490 years mean. And the reason is because there's a little bit of a problem in our understanding of how to translate this. So he lists 70 weeks have been decreed for your people, your holy city, to finish transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. And then this is, I think, the New American Standard says the most holy place. And whenever there's a word in italics, it means, in English translation, it means the translator is supplying that word. And so when we put one translation, we kind of get this, and I should have put this in italics, but to anointed most holy place. And then we put beside it a equally valid good translation, and you see they've translated a most holy one. The issue there is in Hebrew, it's kadosh, kadoshim, holy of holies, which usually talks about the holy of holies, of the temple. But also, when you put the word together, this is the word Messiah. To Messiah, a holy of holies. And so this phrase, holy of holies, can be applied to the temple, but it also can be applied to the high priest Aaron, is called kadosh, kadoshim. And so how do we translate it as a holy place or a holy one? Coupled with that, then, is this statement: so you are to know and to discern from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, so 69 total weeks, 483 years. It will be built again with a plaza and moat, even in times of distress. After the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the Prince, and so is it capital Prince? I mean, it's the same exact word in Hebrew. The people of the Prince who is to come will destroy the city and sanctuary, and its end will come like a flood. Even to the end there will be war, desolations are determined. Now, a couple of questions is like, when does this 483 years start? And people have suggested all of these different starting points. The main two that evangelicals gravitate to will be either 457, 456, or 445, 444. The reason that you see the dates given with slashes is because how do you count a half year? Which year does it belong to? So when we do this thing with different translations, you can see its end will come like a flood. That means the sanctuary. His end will come speedily. That's this Prince. And so one way of translating it is talking about the destruction or end of the sanctuary, and the other is talking about some kind of like coming false Messiah or Antichrist. And in Hebrew, like, the difference between that is very small. Is the antecedent of one pronominal suffix. And so this particular verse, we struggle with it as interpreters because, which is it? Is it talking about an antichrist, or is it talking about the destruction of the temple? When it talks about the Messiah, or when it talks about this figure, he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. And so this is, if you're more toward Ezekiel's temple is going to be a literal rebuilt temple, a huge temple, then this is the 7 weeks of the Antichrist, and the Antichrist is going to go to that rebuilt temple, all of that. If you're going the other way, this could be talking about Jesus. He'll make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will be cut off and put a stop to sacrifice. Afterwards comes the abominations, even until a complete destruction. So the two basic ways depend on how you connect this Ezekiel temple with the 490 years. And if we just step back and just listen to the way people have done it, the two main ways have been dispensational premillennialism and postmillennialism, kind of two big ways. And amillennialism may be on the more postmillennial side, but historic and dispensational premillennialism. But basically there are two ways, and it has to do with how you interpret these prophecies. If we just look on the internet, this is an example of a standard dispensational way to do this. So the decree starts in 445, and it goes to 30 AD when Jesus dies. Then there'll be a gap between the 69th and 70th, and we have the final week of the tribulation. So 483 years, and then an indefinite gap. Then you can see the promises in the Old Testament are happening. So that's a very common, very standard evangelical way to look at these prophecies. Is okay, it's something to do with 490 years, and then the prophecies more literally will be fulfilled in this postponed week. And you can see another drawing doing the same thing. 444, this one goes to 33. You have the gap, and then the 7 years of the tribulation. And so you have the Roman Empire, and then you have like this redeveloped Roman Empire. And that's when you're going to get this Ezekiel temple, the Antichrist, all the fulfillments promised, literally understood. Similarly, all these are just from the internet. You can see the 445. You have Jesus' death, and then the final 7 of the tribulation. Within the final 7, you get a rapture. Some people put that at the beginning. Some people put that in the middle. Some people put it in the pre-wrath. You have the rapture here, and then you have the second coming 7 years later. Standard way of interpreting the prophecy. Much of the Old Testament will be literally fulfilled. That's how many people are doing it. The non-dispensational way comes to the prophecy of Ezekiel's temple and is understanding that of the heavenly temple, not an earthly temple that will be rebuilt, but a heavenly temple that's being built right now. For those who go that way, the decree is going to start in 457 to 408 when Jerusalem's rebuilt. Jesus starts his ministry. In the middle of that ministry, he's cut off and has nothing. And then 3.5 years later, Stephen is stoned and the gospel goes to the Gentiles. That is, God begins to build his real temple out of people. And so under this understanding, there is no 7 years of the tribulation. It all has to do with the coming of Jesus. And so all these are just from the internet, and you can see that's the view being taken by this interpreter. When I did my own document years ago, and sorry about the typo here, I'm basically doing that 457 to 408 and then to 26, and then the Messiah is cut off and has nothing, and then 3.5 years later the gospel goes to the Gentiles. The New Geneva Study Bible is taking that view. And of course, just from the internet, you can see that's the basic view of this interpreter. So when you come and you look at Daniel's prophecy that Jesus is that stone in his kingdom and that it strikes, but how do you understand that? Is there a gap? Is this something else? And there really isn't a firm opinion among evangelicals to which way to go. You have lots of people in the dispensational camp. You've got lots of people in the non-dispensational camp. And all of us, I think, are trying to understand exactly what this is prophesying. And so as you've read, done the work, you get to join that discussion and say, look at the things and to see which one you're most convinced by. So the question is the end positive or is the end negative? Is going to be tied up to how you interpret that final week. Is it still future to us? Then probably you're going to come down a pretty negative view of what's going to happen before the end. If you go the other route, you're going to probably have a pretty positive view of the end. If the idea of literal fulfillment in the Old Testament is persuasive, then just a standard reading of the eschatological discourse in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and Revelation is going to just, dozens, if not hundreds of verses where you can say, well, this all shows that there is something massively negative in the future for us. And many people have been historically and are convinced by that view. And it's a very powerful, persuasive view. If you come down on the other side and you believe that 7 weeks has something to do with Jesus' death and perhaps the destruction in 70 AD, then these verses will probably weigh heavy on your mind. God blessed them. God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, and over everything that moves on the earth. And the reason that I put the Hebrew up is God said to them, plural, the man and the woman, you all be fruitful, you all multiply, you all fill the earth, you all subdue it. Meaning that the command was given to the man and his wife. So if Jesus is the new Adam and the church is the new Eve, are they going to fulfill this? And if you say yes to that, then perhaps it's more positive. Ask of me and I will make the nations your inheritance, the very end of the earth your possession. You will rule them. That looks like some kind of world empire. Sit in my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. Well, what counts as an enemy of Christ? Well, whatever those enemies are will be conquered. Psalm 110:2, you rule in the midst of your enemies. Paul, he must rule until he's put all his enemies under his feet. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. The waters completely cover the sea. And so is this talking about some kind of world empire? And of the Messiah says there will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace. Looks like some kind of world domination. Your seed will possess the gate of its enemies. And so what we get in all that is how do you do it? And if you are comparing the two Adams, how do the Old Testament prophecies about eschatology come into view? And will they succeed? That is, this new cosmic power couple. Of course, all of this is going to be connected with how a person looks at the destruction of the temple in 586, together with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. How do you put all that together? And we as evangelicals just have not come down on one specific way. We're still debating which way to do that. And so when you read these prophecies, you're kind of reading it in that kind of lens of uncertainty. How do I understand Ezekiel's temple? How do I understand the prophecies? Historically, there have been four schools. Historic premillennialism, that's probably historically the major one. That is seeing a gap and seeing the 7 years in the tribulation. Dispensational premillennialism is exactly the same, but the difference is there's a distinction between the rapture and the second coming. The rapture occurs first, and then the second coming later at the end of the tribulation. Amillennialism sees the power of evil and the power of impurity of the church increasing, and then Jesus returns, but no 1,000-year reign. Postmillennialism sees Jesus coming at the end of that ideal age to begin eternity. Good people have belonged to all schools. We're still working that out as Christian interpreters. The basic issues that a person has to wrestle with is futurism. Is this something still future to us? Is it a case perhaps of preterism and futurism where you have some kind of dual fulfillment? And then the particular question, how much of this is related to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD? All issues, and gloriously as students we get to pursue them and to look together and to explore. If you're interested in these things, any good study Bible will give you some options. NIV Study Bible, ESV Study Bible, Ryrie Study Bible, very good dispensational study Bible. On the issues of preterism, there are great websites these days. And a very readable book from someone who comes down on the non-dispensational side, The Last Days According to Jesus, does a pretty fair job of trying to argue lots of different views and ends up coming down on the postmillennial side. So really enjoyed our time together. I hope you've enjoyed as you work through the text. And my continued prayer is that God will richly bless you as you study His Word.